down by President Kennedy. But then let's get on to other fields now. Say tax. One always associates libertarians with their position on tax. Now, I've always agreed, at least I've always been very much fetched by the argument that the progressive feature of the income tax is against the idea of equal treatment under the law. And I think Hayek makes that point as eloquently as any philosophical economic point has ever made in his book, Constitution of Freedom. But to say that you're against the progressive income tax is really not to make the case against an income tax, is it?
No, we're against the tax in principle. The progressivity of it, of course, is bad, but the income tax is unnecessary. Again, something happened in the 20th century where the American people decided that there would be...
The 16th Amendment happened, yeah.
Something happened where we have changed our attitude about what we want from our government. We've ushered in this overwhelming runaway welfare state that we cannot afford, and we've also become an American empire where we have troops around the world and we pay for the defense of Japan and Germany and everybody else. But at the same time, you had to have two ways of financing this. One we decided we'd have an income tax that we would start subtly and small, that would escalate to the point that it really is the biggest ripoff in the country, along with a Federal Reserve System that allows us to monetize
but that happened
debt.
65 years ago.
Well, I know, but since 65 years, we have seen the deterioration of this society that we love. I mean, the Libertarian Society is no longer with us because of these ideas.
Yeah, but in 1922, the top tax was 70%. Right now, it's 28%. So how can you say that we have gone down a slippery slope where we're getting worse and worse?
Because the amount of tax coming out of the economy is still much greater. The amount of tax the government takes is over 40%. You know, when the founding fathers got sick and tired of the British taxing us, they had a tax of about 25%. The American people are rather complacent to put up with this. But more important...
Before you run away with that figure, let's remind our audience that in the first place it's not 40%, it's 39%. And the second place, 16 of it is by the individual states and localities. The federal tax is too high, but it's under 23%.
What did the indentured serf, what was he required to pay his master? 25%. And so we are a bit, we have enslaved ourselves. Not only are we enslaved through the tax system, but we're enslaved because we keep all the records. If we don't keep the right records, can you imagine this tax simplification bill that just came out? And if we don't learn those forms and do it right, we have a gun pointed at our head by the IRS and say, you're going to be put in prison if you don't learn to fill out those forms. How many times did they have to go through the W-4 form? I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. We have to keep the information, then we have to turn it over to the government. We then set ourselves up for self-incrimination. Then we are guilty until proven innocent. They say, you owe such and such amount. We are guilty and proven innocent, and then we will go to jail and they confiscate money from our banks.
You got it a little bit wrong, Dr. Paul. Here's how it works. If the federal government, if the IRS contests your tax, the presumption is theirs.
Right.
But in any prosecution of you for a criminal trespass, the presumption is yours.
The IRS can come and confiscate our money very easily if they send us a bill and we don't pay it. If they send you a bill at the end of the year and say you did not pay $10,000 on taxes, you jolly well better prove that you don't owe it. Isn't that correct?
Yes, but if they charge fraud, then the presumption is yours.
Yeah, but if they send you a bill, it's up to you to hire your attorney and hire your accountants and spend a lifetime or many years of agony to prove yourself innocent with your records that you turn over to them. But back to the general principle, taxation is bad not only because the IRS, I think, is such a vicious organization, but because taxes is confiscation of wealth, because it isn't part of the American tradition. It wasn't what the founding fathers intended. It isn't what we had through the 19th century, and it's totally unnecessary in a libertarian society. It's only necessary if we want a government that's going to redistribute wealth and defend the American empire.
Hang on a sec. When it was ruled in Marbury versus Madison that the power to tax is the power to destroy, and the right of the state to tax the federal government was removed, it was done by somebody who was, as a young man, around in Philadelphia when the Constitution was formed. Now, those people didn't say, there shall therefore be no tax. They said really that the tax policy has to be made with reference to constitutional principles. Now, it wasn't for 120 years after that before they could have an income tax, so we were sliding in that direction from about 100 on. But I seem, in your literature, to be reading as though America was founded on the assumption that there would be no taxes.
No, I don't think I said that at all. I said there'd be no income tax. You know, there's been taxes early in our history. We had taxes in the 19th century, but they were very minimal. And the people paid them, and there were excises, taxes, and tariffs, and a few things to manage the minimal government that we had and that we wanted. But now that we endorse the welfare warfare state, it is absolutely necessary to have an income tax in order to finance it, and even that isn't enough. $220 billion deficit last year by conservatives. I mean, there's something wrong going on here. What do they, that's why they need the Federal Reserve System in order to monetize all this debt as well.
Well, there's a lot. Well, you don't have to monetize the debt as long as you have foreign capital willing to take it up. Remember that?
But they do monetize a bit of it too. But what happens when Japan quits buying our debt, which they probably will soon, and then there's going to be a monetary crisis on top of a stock market crisis.
When that happens, you can run for office again and be elected.
Matter of fact, it might come before November, so watch out.
but let's get back to the business of taxation. There, we know that we have certain concerns in common. Any libertarian who denies that becomes, in my judgment, a solipsist. But since we have concerns in common, we've got to tax somehow. Now, the value-added tax, for instance, for which there's some enthusiasm, Milton Friedman says it's the most dangerous tax in the entire world because it's terribly easy to raise and sort of unnoticeable. Now, both of us, I think, would share an objection to the progressive feature of the income tax. But why do you object to an income tax as a form of taxation, given the fact that you acknowledge that some forms of taxation have got to be controllable?
Well, first reason is the IRS abuses our civil liberties, and we don't like it. And
but once again, you're confusing management with theory.
But that's the nature of government, and it's the nature of a taxing authority, too.
At the Garden of Eden, it was proved that man is not going to be a very good manager.
That's why we want to make sure government, we want to minimize those evils, and once you turn this power over to government, it becomes much more magnified. So we want to limit it to individuals making mistakes or doing their own wrongs, because then the problems aren't nearly as great. But once we turn this over to government...
Well, give me a form of taxation of which you would approve.
You know, I think it's interesting about Milton Friedman worrying about the value-added tax, and Dr. Friedman happens to be a good friend and an ally on so many issues. But you know, as I understand it, was he who introduced the withholding part. Now, you talk about a sinister tax.
No, it wasn't he.
Oh, wasn't he? Then that's my mistake. But this whole idea, it was in the 40s that they introduced that. To me, I would see the withholding.
Leon Henderson who did.
Okay, it was the withholding element. The principle of the withholding element makes it much more sinister than say a consumer tax.
Because it's less conspicuous, yeah.
That's right. So I don't think the income tax would be less conspicuous, because most people only believe the tax they pay is the check they write at the end of the year, because the businessman again becomes the slave of the state by collecting all these taxes, keeping all these records, and doing all the things that I don't believe we should be doing. Well, I think you know, my position right now in the campaign is to make a very important point. Government is too big. Taxes are too high. We can eliminate 40% of taxes by getting rid of the income tax. That's approximately the amount of money we get.
Well, what are you going to do, having eliminated 40% of the government, about outstanding responsibilities of government?
That all depends. See, this goes back to the nature.
What are you going to do to the individual who says, well, whatever I feel about Social Security, in fact, I'm entitled to it. I'm 65 years old, and I've been paying it all my life. And well, it's a contractual obligation.
You know, I think that one thing that we could do is probably be honest with the American people. You know, I was a Reagan supporter and believed in a lot of what he said. And
yeah, you went for him 76.